Blackstone agents, black cubed. Anyway, so let's jump into tonight's topic. I don't know if you caught I haven't watched any news reports about this. I read a Washington Post article about this. The Obsidians, that's cool. Knights of the Blackstone. But in case you don't know the story, the Washington Post dumped a massive treasure trove of information today. 2,000 damning pages of testimony, which provides proof that the United States government has been lying to the American people about what's going on in Afghanistan, the progress we're making, and that they have been lying to us about this from the very beginning. These documents that were published are being called the Afghanistan papers. So if you follow it on Twitter or whatever, people are using hashtag Afghanistan papers. These papers are brimming with evidence of a systematic, concerted effort by our government to lie to the American people for the specific purpose of trying to maintain public support for the war, despite them knowing that we were losing the war the whole time and had no chance of winning it. So how this came about is that over the last 3 years, the Washington Post has been involved in 2 different federal level Freedom of Information Act lawsuits against the U.S. government to try and pry these documents loose and make them available to the public. Now, say what you will about the political leanings of the Washington Post. I'm right there with you. I know that they've got a liberal bent. Most of these papers do, especially the Washington Post and the New York Times. However, what they have put out, the documents themselves have proven to be just incredible. They really have done an invaluable service to the public by forcing the government to release these thousands of pages of material, because it exposes a lot of the secret machinations of the deep state itself and how it foments war for the benefit of the military-industrial complex. So the Afghanistan papers include, it's not just a bunch of random documents. It's primarily, the bulk of it are interviews with 600 insiders, people who had intimate knowledge of various aspects of the war in Afghanistan. And so in these interviews with these insiders, they are they're pretty doggone open. They are highly critical in their complaints. They offer these shocking confessions and very explicit explanations about their frustrations with the war in Afghanistan and the corruption of the U.S. government during the course of the war. Well, in addition to the interviews, you've also got quite a few government memos that shed light on this, the plot to keep the USA mired in this unwinnable war. So how did this come about? Well, what are these documents? What's the source of these documents? Back in 2014, the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, which we'll just abbreviate SIGAR, SIGAR. This is an agency that was created by Congress back in 2014 to investigate waste and fraud, misuse of the tax dollars in Afghanistan. And so SIGAR conducts this. It's a fact-finding project, not so much an investigation, but gathering information, gathering evidence. And the particular project was called Lessons Learned. And the reason they named it that was because the purpose of this was to find out how we were misusing money, how waste was taking place, so that in future wars we don't repeat those mistakes. At least that's what Congress charged this agency with. What's so funny to me about this is that the agency, which is supposed to be investigating waste, government waste, the project they did cost $11 million. Their fact-finding project cost $11 million. I have no idea how they could possibly have spent $11 million to conduct interviews, which is basically all they did. But I digress. SIGAR interviews over 600 people. And these are people who have firsthand experience with the war. These are they're familiar with the activities of the war. They're familiar with the expenditures. They know nobody knows more than these people who were interviewed. These are the people closest to the money, closest to the military operations. They interviewed 600 individuals, Americans. They also interviewed Afghan officials. They interviewed NATO officials. This was huge. This project was massive in the amount of information that they gathered. And they're not talking to just, Joe Blows. There were several former U.S. ambassadors that were interviewed, White House officials, Pentagon officials. There were military generals, other government insiders. So these are highly credible people providing firsthand information. Now, one thing that made this possible was that while some of the people went on record with their names and put their reputations on the line and said it like it was without fear of retribution, what made the project successful to elicit the truth of what was going on is that SIGAR offered these interviewees the option of remaining anonymous, meaning they could give the information without fear of recrimination because their names would be redacted and it wouldn't come forward. So it turns out that 90% of the people that were interviewed out of this 600 some people chose to keep their names private. The interviewers with SIGAR knows who they are, and they actually have a record of it. In fact, that's part of the ongoing litigation. The Washington Post sued not only to gain access to the reports, the thousands of pages of the interviews, but the Washington Post is also suing. They've been in litigation since September, waiting for or calling on the federal court, to also make public the names of everybody, including the people who thought they had anonymity. The argument of the Washington Post is twofold. One, it becomes more credible when you put a name to the face or a name to the report. But more than that, these are people who are carrying out the programs of the government with U.S. tax dollars. And the government is accountable to the people, and we, the people, have a right to know who is responsible for all of this fraud and waste. And so they're suing. I don't know how I feel yet about this. That no decision has been made yet on releasing the names of these people. I have mixed feelings because these people are not technically whistleblowers, because this was not a criminal investigation. It was fact-finding, but they don't qualify under what qualifies you as a whistleblower. These were not whistleblowers. So they don't have the whistleblower protections. But at the same time, if we have this precedent that if you make these reports, you're going to, it's likely that your name's going to come out anyway. And then you've got to deal with the higher ups cracking down on you. So I've got mixed feelings. At this point, I'm kind of 50-50. I see both sides of the argument. You're welcome to share your thoughts on that. But the Washington Post decided, though, rather than wait for the court to make that ruling, they just went ahead and published these documents. And today they posted 2,000 pages worth of material. And I'm going to give you kind of a summary or an overview of that. The Afghanistan papers show that U.S. officials knew without any doubt that the United States was not making any progress whatsoever in winning the war in Afghanistan. They knew it. For example, there was a 3-star general who was interviewed, gave his name, Douglas Lute. He served as the Afghan war czar in the administrations of both President Bush and Obama. And he said, one of the things he said is this, quote, let me get my glasses here. He said, "What are we trying to do here? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking." And that's the czar. He says, we have no idea what we're doing in Afghanistan. And he also suggested, and his interview was back in 2015, he suggested that if the American people knew that thousands of U.S. troops had given their lives and continued to be dying in Afghanistan due to the ineptitude of the members of Congress in their oversight of this, due to the bureaucratic stupidity of the pencil pushers, not just in the White House, but also in the State Department, and also the hawkishness of the war hawks in the Defense Department. If the American people knew that due to their bungling and incompetence and deceit, that all of these troops had died in a war that we knew from the beginning we weren't going to win, then the American people would likely conclude, according to General Lute, that the war was in vain, that our soldiers died in vain. If you send somebody to go fight and there's no chance of them winning, and the fight is not a moral fight in defense of our country anyway, you are just throwing away American lives. Right? We don't want to send our troops to go into conflicts unless it is for the constitutional purpose of defending the people of the United States and those interests that are vital to us. And I don't mean interests like, we got to control the oil in Syria or wherever, or So